and she frequently is called upon by various media outlets to comment on contemporary fashion. So we're really, really lucky to have her with us today. And please join me in giving a warm welcome to Miss Laird Borrelli-Persson.
Thanks for having me, and thank you all for coming out. It's nice that we can gather. I think so.
Okay, cool, just making sure. So let's get this party started. The moment we all have been waiting for, to dig in a little bit more about this coveted book, Marimekko, The Art of Printmaking, which is here on the table and is also available for purchase this evening. And just so you all are aware, we will be doing a book signing following the event. So have your books ready, and choosing a winner of our Marimekko giveaway will be announced at the end of the event as well. But to get this conversation started, I'd love to ask you a little bit about just the very beginning of this project. When you were approached to write Marimekko, The Art of Printmaking, what made you want to be a part of the project?
Oh, well, so many things. I hadn't done a book in a while, but I'm a Scandinophile, and I had recently been in Finland for a conference and to see the fashion students. So I really loved the city, and so that was really nice. I was also tempted by the offer to go see the archives and use them in the writing of the book, but the pandemic put paid to that. So, but that was interesting, because then I decided what I could provide would be an American perspective on a Finnish brand. And so I dug deep into mostly American or North American, some European sources to sort of track how Marimekko had been documented from an outsider's perspective, and that was super interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And anyone who knows Marimekko well knows that it's a coveted Finnish favorite. So to have it interpreted by an American writer of your caliber is really, really interesting for us to be able to see Marimekko from your perspective. So thank you for that. Going through the archives of Marimekko, which I'm sure you did a lot of in the process of creating this book, what was your favorite archival material, whether it be a photo or a fabric or a print?
Well, it took me a while. I must be getting dense or something, but I grew up with a room with 7 flowers print, which was done for a licensing deal with Dan River. And it took me a while to remember that, and then I was like, oh, duh, yes. So I guess it has been part of my life for a really, really long time. But I think what interests me in fashion and history is actually the people and their motivation for doing things. So although this is a book about Marimekko, the company, it really is also a book about Armi Ratia, because it is, I mean, the company's 70 now, so it's ready to go into another phase, but it really was and is her creation, and we can talk about that more later.
Yeah, and truly, like, as being on the Marimekko team, even coming aboard, Armi was definitely one of the key factors. She's our founder, and our brand is still very, very much centered around her spirit, and everything we do is kind of enamored by her words that she left behind for us. So I definitely echo that sentiment as well. What did you enjoy most about working on the book?
Well, teamwork is always really nice. So I was working with the team in Helsinki, in London with Thames Hudson, with whom the book originated. And then it was me at my dining room table with my patient family. So that was really nice. But again, I think it's trying to find a sense of life and a sense of personality in history, and contextualizing, you know, to the best of my ability, to try to understand the whys and the motivations behind things.
Yeah, definitely inspiring. As well, the book tells the story of the house's most iconic designs, of course, one of which being the Unikko that you have there on your scarf. Which one is your favorite of the stories?
Oh, how can you pick favorites? I mean, Unikko has such power. I think I keep coming back to it. The woman who designed it, her granddaughter just did a new version for, I think for the anniversary. And it happened by accident working with the design team. And it's sort of like marbleized, the big petals are marbleized, so it almost looks like you're looking through the fabric, like almost like through a window. And that was super magic to me, the idea of like negative space. And there are just so many variations it can take that, and I think it just has a real pow. And then Marimekko has I was really excited by this. They have a relatively new line, I think, called Kioski.
Yes.
And it's always changing, but when I first was introduced to it, it was like a sweatshirt with one big Unico poppy, and it was like, it was amazing to see it sort of so accessible and like on a hoodie. It was amazing. So I'd love to see more than that. And I really hope, I keep asking, but I would love a hoodie with a reflective Unico on it.
Ooh. Nice.
So that's my wish.
Nice. Inching there. We have some dresses though coming for fall, winter, and it's funny that you mentioned like the different iterations of the Unico print, because with our designs being such a core part of our DNA, we're very, very particular about how the prints are used. But in 2022, for the first time, we start to see the Unico print being used in ways that it had never been before. One starts to be the marble that you see this winter in the fall-winter collection, which is available now. But as we ease into 2022, you start to see Unico inside of Unico, like mini Unicos inside of our Unico, which has never been done before. And then also Unico partnering up with other prints, a part of our family. So this will be a really interesting year to keep your eye out for on Marimekko as our new creative director, Rebecca Bay, her full design inspiration comes to life in the new collection in 2022.
I think maybe we should talk a little bit about the story of Unico. It was designed by a very talented designer called Maya Isola. And I think we need to talk about Armi more, but let's suffice to say that Armi was a force of nature. She willed things into being. She was very kind to her employees. She had a summer house, and they were always invited, and there was a spa, and they could get their hair done and bring their kids. But she also had very particular taste, and she insisted that flowers never be done. And I think that there are stated reasons and other reasons. So one of the stated reasons is that you could never represent the beauty of a flower in nature. But that rings false to me, because almost all Marimekko, or the majority of Marimekko prints, are inspired by nature. So, I mean, you can't represent, the beauty of a rock either, but they do, and there's no complaints. But I think when Marimekko started, the print, the typical prints for women were small florals, right? And I think Armi and Marimekko rebelled against everything like that. So to me, I think it had to do with an association of a decorative femininity that she rejected. But anyway, Maya Isola was having none of it. She wanted to do what she did. And so she made this poppy. She broke the rules. It's kind of like a rebel yell. And of course, it was irresistible, and almost every Marimekko collection since then has included a floral. And over time, Armi came to love flowers, and you would find her in her office with the portrait of the founder of Bauhaus and lots of flowers. And it seemed significant to me that wildflowers were her favorite, because she was a unique and strong-willed person.
Yeah, that's the perfect way to kind of summarize the story of the Unico poppy, for sure. It's our most popular print, our most well-known print, and we call it our rebellious flower because it's come from such an interesting story of just going against the grain, and now today it's our most well-known print, which I think is kind of like the perfect way to summarize Marimekko, kind of like going against the grain, and now that's exactly who we are. And similar to that story, the book also shares stories about Marimekko's successes. So of the successes in the book, or out of the book, what would be your favorite?
Well, for me, as a fashion historian, I was quite interested. One of the most interesting things to me in the book was to see how Marimekko intersected with fashion but was not fashion. In fact, Army insisted it was not fashion and that she did not participate in the fashion system. She did have Balenciaga jewelry. I think she did like clothes, but I think it's a matter of conception. She did not participate in the fashion system, which is an important distinction. Marimekko did make clothes, but they were designed as and conceived as design objects that fit into interiors that were intended to be well designed and to last over time, which we hear everyone talking about today when they're talking about sustainability. But I really think that Army and her husband and friends were a bunch of artists and architects and product designers, and I really think she applied that kind of thinking to dressmaking. And she did get a little her back up a little bit because she was doing A-lines and sackbacks way before Courrèges and Balenciaga. And of course, Marimekko did intersect with fashion, as I said, mostly in the 60s, and with some of the prints being pop or op art. But I think the important thing is that when Balenciaga arrived at the sackback, it was the process of a long evolution of a design vision. And at Marimekko, I don't think it was that. I think the fabric was the starting point. The point was not to destroy the pattern or the print, so you used as few cuts as possible. And of course, this worked very well with geometric shapes like A-lines and sackbacks, right? But it also worked into the philosophy, which was that women should be free, their bodies should be free. I mean, you could say that Chanel was interested in this, or Poiret, but it wasn't really about the corset. It was about a way of understanding how women could be in the world. And in Finland, according to, I think it was an English account, it was known that Finnish women had a lot more freedom than women in England or US at the time. And so this was about being able to go about your everyday life and not being a decorative object. These were dresses that you could move in, you could pick up from school in, you could go shopping in, you could wash them, you could have your grandmother's dress, you could give it to your daughter. And in fact, I did ask the team in Finland to put a reach out to all the employees to share their first Marimekko memories, because almost everyone has one. And so many of them were, I remember from Grandma's cottage, or I, had my sisters, or I had my cousins, or my grandmother's, shirts, and that they do seem to last, and they are made, which is quite wonderful. The prints are done in Helsinki at the factory where the offices are, which is a pretty unique situation when so much production has been displaced from where the design is. But can I talk a little bit about how I think Marimekko relates to today? So when I got this proposal, I don't know if it was before COVID, but when I actually started working on the book, it was during COVID. And the more I read about Army, Ratia, who's the founder of the company, the more I realized that she was dealing with loss and trauma, a different loss and trauma than COVID, because this was with war. But Finland is sort of sandwiched between Sweden and Russia. The country only declared its independence from Russia in 1917 and then immediately had a civil war. So Army saw relatives, I think her father was injured in the war, and a great number of Finns were displaced and made homeless. Then after the Second World War, part of Finland was ceded to Russia. So I think there was this great sense of loss. One of her brothers came back from the war just so affected by trauma that he was not himself. So what I read in between the lines was this great yearning for home, like a big hole, a loss. And she was a big personality person, but if you read between the lines, she talks about, losing her home and escaping with one dress. She talks about a broken tea set. And then when she was successful enough, she had her grandparents' house taken from Russia, then what had become Russia, and then moved to Finland. So I think she felt this great attachment to home. And of course, Marimekko, the whole idea of Marimekko is to bring joy to every day, whether that's putting on a scarf or a dress, or in many cases, a Marimekko napkin or ribbon. And I learned that it's a tradition, maybe dying out now, but in Finland to change your linens, curtains, and things with the seasons. So you also remember that Finland is very cold and dark for a long time. There's also this huge connection to nature. The country, don't quote me on the number, but I think it's about 70% forest. So the prints are usually nature inspired. So it was about bringing the outside in, but also bringing light into darkness and making home something special. And that also relates to the Bauhaus ideal of bringing good design to more people. And then as I was finishing, I think the night I was turning in my manuscript, I found a graduate thesis, and I'm sorry I can't remember the woman's name, but it was really fascinating because it said just at the time when Marimekko was being formed, the idea of the home and the family was changing. So I think if you've read 19th century novels, you know that a lot of fancier homes had like a sitting room that was never touched or only touched on Sunday. But after the war, we started moving towards, I think in the Western world, in general towards the idea of a nuclear family, and a nuclear family living in a house that was not so precious, that everything, it was a real like a building for living in a way. It worked for you, and it was more intimate and close. And I think you find, I'm constantly reminded by my peers in Helsinki that Marimekko isn't all primary colors and brights, but I think for me, and I do believe for a lot of people, that's the first impression you have of Marimekko, is a splash of color, probably Unico in its poppy red. But I think it's really important to remember that when Marimekko started, Helsinki was in ruins. The country had lost a huge part of its landmass. It was post-war. It was really depressing. It was gray. It was rubble. And here were a bunch of creative people, and so in a new country, essentially, right, that had sort of a blank page, and were trying to realize ideals about community, about nature, about what we would call sustainability, but living well with things, quality, longevity, and putting these ideals, into motion, both in society and how people consume and things. In fact, Army I found one interview that said she came downstairs wearing a button that said, "I'm not a hippie," which of course, she was kind of a bohemian. But she did try at some point to start a community, and they built a test house, but where her workers could live and work, and it would be like this Marimekko village. It didn't pan out, as many idealistic projects don't, but I think it tells you a little bit about the idealism and the belief in how design can affect one's life.
Yeah, definitely. And we carry along a lot of that community feeling into the brand today in our Helsinki headquarters, and also where our factory is held. We have Mari Tori, our Marimekko restaurant there. And every morning, the entire team is invited to come have morning porridge together, which is kind of like our community thing that we do together as a team. So the ideals that Army put in place 70 years ago already are still very alive and well in our brand today. And you spoke a little bit about Army and the dress and the printing factory. And we at Marimekko say that it all started with the dress, which it did, putting our prints onto dresses. But if we were to get a little bit more into that, it actually all started with the printing factory. Army had this printing factory, and from that had a vision of Marimekko being a dress company from there. So having had the opportunity to visit our printing factory in Herttoniemi, would you be able to tell us a little bit about your experience? Or
I
you
couldn't
hadn't?
go because of
Oh,
COVID.
of
so
COVID, yeah.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah,
No.
but it's a very, very special place. I would say a very, very large percentage of our home and our ready-to-wear, everything that's cotton, linen, those things are printed in our Helsinki printing factory. So being able to have like that close touch on the brand is something that's been really, really important for Marimekko. Great. So what is your favorite aspect about Marimekko, having dug way back into our history, into the very, very beginning up until now? What would be your favorite aspect of the brand?
I think the daring to dream of something different and realize it. Army's husband bought this factory. They almost didn't make it. I mean, they ran out of money several times, and it was because she found printing screens in the factory. She had plans. She was working for an advertising agency and had just resigned to go to the mountains and write her novel when her husband bought this factory. And then she had done things with textiles, but then she gathered this bunch of young creatives like Maya Isola around her. And another thing is, it's been a woman-led company for almost all its 70 years, which is quite something. And I think you see that innovation continuing now. When I talk to the people at the company, they're doing wonderful collaborations with this modern day sustainability in terms of fibers. So obviously in Scandinavia, the wood industry is really huge. So they're I think extracting birch. I don't know the science of it, but they're working with really advanced companies to try to create sustainable fibers out of materials that are native to Finland, which is pretty exciting.
Yes, that is, you're referring to our recent partnership with Spinnova, where we worked on a wood-based fiber, and yeah, it's a definitely exciting project and kind of a little bit of a peek into what we have planned for Marimekko into the future, but I have a question about that I'll hold on to a little bit longer. But you already spoke a little bit about what Marimekko offers to the worlds of art and fashion and lifestyle, but I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't anything we were leaving on the table there in terms of what you think Marimekko has to offer to today's world in those fields.
Well, I mean, I think for those of us that were able to be home on lockdown and not saving lives, and being in hospitals and whatnot, I felt, and I heard from other people, that it's the little joys in life. Like, personally, I got really excited by going to the hardware store. It was like the only place I could go besides the grocery store. But you discover, like, I don't know, neon key covers or just little things that make you smile. And I think this concentration on things that are accessible, so they can be precious to you, but maybe you could save up and buy it, that it's not one of these things that, only 1.1% but something that you can buy that's beautiful and brings you joy every day. And I think we really need to appreciate small moments and small things. And I also personally believe in the life of objects, that whether or not you believe that it's inherent in the object or something that you bring to it or a memory that it evokes, that these things really can make us smile or just stop or just please the eye in the day. And we're always moving so quickly in New York and in fashion in New York. It's a quickie, you know, and yes, I think we need to take time and look at something and appreciate things and the people who had ideas and the strength and the bravery to realize them.
Definitely, and that actually is truly the core of our design philosophy, the idea of bringing joy to everyday life, whether it's with a mug or your favorite scarf or your dress, just the idea of invading a lifestyle in a positive way that's just constantly bringing joy is kind of the core of everything that's made at Marimekko, what our intent is. So it's really nice to hear that be what you think Marimekko offers to the world today. And when thinking about Marimekko's super sustainable and super creative future, like we were speaking a little bit about the Spinova wood fiber, what excites you most?
Well, I'm really excited because I had the opportunity to do an interview with Rebecca Bay, who just assumed the creative directorship at the company. And we had a super interesting conversation, and it's in Q&A format, so if you're interested, it does happen to be on Vogue Runway. But Rebecca comes from working with The Gap, with Uniqlo. She founded COS, that division of H&M that's quite minimal. So minimal and Marimekko are not really ideas that come together. You know, they're certainly not the first things you think of, but Scandinavian design or Nordic design in general is often minimal. So I think we'll see really, really interesting things from her. One of the questions I asked her was, you know, like, what do you do about solids, right? It's a print house, but it takes a lot of, you know, a whole look might be a lot for a lot of people, but you also need to adjust your eyes. So what if you were to show a printed shirt with a plain slack? You know, that might be more accessible to people. And she was like, yeah, but why would they come to Marimekko for a solid? And I was like, but also it offers, I understand that, but it offers a different way of you know, integrating the brand into your life. And so one of the things, she was like, I can't wait till you see the collection. I can't wait till you see it. So one of the ways she's creating solids is by doing like a black on black print or a navy on navy. So it is Uniqlo, but it's not the first thing that you see. So I think, and I think her experience working with these brands that are, you know, founded on to speak to many people, and her own personal penchant for minimalism. I mean, when I talked to her, we were Zooming, but she was wearing a white sweater in a white room and maybe drinking white wine. I mean, I think this is quite interesting, and also being very fascinated by the Nordic countries. There are real differences between the cultures. They are distinct cultures. Of course, there are through lines, but she said to me that being a Dane, looking in at the Finnish tradition and being an outsider in some ways gives her some is a position of strength or a difference that can be a strength. And she's worked, you know, internationally. She's lived in New York. She's lived in Japan. She also worked for Uniqlo. So yeah, I think we can expect good things. And the other thing I said to her, I didn't want to be provocative, but I really had to ask because I really wanted to know, is that, you know, why Marimekko was on the calendar for Copenhagen Fashion Week, and they did a film. But I said, why would Marimekko, which has always been about timeless design and not about trends and not about really seasons, be on a Fashion Week calendar? I don't, you know, respectfully, I just don't understand the connection. And she said, well, she wanted to do something during Copenhagen Fashion Week because they've made a commitment to sustainability. So by 2022, brands have to meet certain criteria in order to be able to participate. So she wanted to show support for that. But she also explained she has this very nice idea that usually designers every 6 or 3 months create a new collection, often with a different theme, but she's picking one theme that will last for a year. So this time it's a sort of neo-folk, and she liked the idea, and I think we are thinking about home and folk motifs are part of the Marimekko archive. But also, as she reminded me, folk expressions, across the globe, there are many commonalities. People are working with wood, they're working with straw, they're representing the things around them, horses, flowers. So it really is a very broad subject that many people can relate to. So I'm super excited to see what we'll do. And if you're a Marimekko fan, I think you'll see, she told me, you'll see a lot of action in the kioski area. And although Marimekko started with dresses, the Yoikapoika shirt, which I've seen with these
There's a few.
Yeah,
you have one back here in the brown, one over there in the black and the white, and our waiters are wearing them too.
So Marimekko means Mary's dress, like a little girl's dress. And Jokapoika is sort of like the little boy or the boy that goes with it. But in the 60s, it was known as like the architect's uniform. So I think Rebecca has said we'll be seeing more men's and unisex in kioski. So it's just really exciting to see how she'll take it.
Yeah, definitely. And just to bridge on that, because the Yoikapoika, like the Unico, is also very, very special to our brand, and it translates directly to the everybody shirt. And in this room, we already have like 5 people in it. So it's one of our most democratic pieces, and it also kind of embodies the attitude that Army hoped that our brand would have. So I'm so glad you mentioned that important piece for us. But this is a really exciting discussion. We actually have a few minutes for any questions. If anyone has any questions for Laird, just raise your hand. We can get a mic over to you. Let's start in the back, because then we'll come over here.
Thank you. A lot of my Marimekko is truly Finnish, but there's also been a very strong collaboration with Japanese designers, and I wonder if you have some reflections on how the two cultures or sensitivities work together.
Yes, I have to say, I'm married to a Swede, and I tease him about this, but every Scandinavian country or Nordic country that I've been to, someone has said to me that our culture is very akin to that of Japan. I'm an American. I don't really know exactly what they mean, but I think Japanese designers working for Marimekko have designed some really memorable prints, the little car that everyone knows. I think Marimekko is open to diversity, and they're more and more looking to expand their artists from all parts of the world. But you're right, there has been a special affinity between, or a home for Japanese designers at Marimekko. But I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer for you. Maybe respect for the art. All of the prints, I must say, the artist gets credit. So it says Marimekko, but the artist is given freedom. Army said she encouraged her designers to be free, and she gave them the playground to play in.
I'm sorry, and if I could just quickly add to that, Marimekko and the Japanese market have a bit of a love story, similarities in language and approach to art, which kind of blends us very closely. We even often hear that Marimekko, when first introduced to clients, they automatically think it's Japanese. So I think it's the commonalities in language and approach to art that are most relevant in that connection there. But I think we had a question over here.
Thank you. Enjoying the discussion so far. If I heard correctly, you had mentioned the Bauhaus a little bit. Can you expand a little bit on the Bauhaus's influence on some of the patterns, the designs, and some of the direction of Marimekko?
I don't know that I'm the expert on that. I think it was more about the ideas, and also many Finnish architects, were working in the modernist style, and were influenced by Bauhaus. And I think you can't separate Marimekko from creative expression in Finland. I think it was a very small circle of creative people all feeding off of each other. But I think it was Gropius that there was a portrait of in Army's office. And to me, it was more the idea of form and function and bringing good design to people. I mean, the Marimekko print language is very much derived from mostly from nature. Army's prints were quite Bauhausian. They were grids. They were very geometric grids. She only designed at the very beginning. But then as you go along, you see the influence of folk and sort of Russian folk. And if you are in Helsinki, I'm not an expert on it, but I did notice when I went to the the thrift stores, you see like Russian icons next to, the more Scandinavian things that you usually would find. So you do feel the mix of cultures. But then something I think that's not very Bauhausian is this sort of mystic nature, like fairy princesses, wolves that can talk, this sort of forest fantasy, which is also part of the canon there. I'm sorry if I didn't answer
No, that's
very
good.
well.
That's great. I appreciate the input. Thank you.
Simply glancing at the book, etc., I thought, before I looked closely, I thought it was a Japanese design. And the similarities are extreme. And I wanted to ask you, when did she first see Japanese design? Was it a foundatory impulse, or came later?
I believe that the first Japanese designer that I see credited is in the 70s. And I don't know when the company started selling to Japan, so I don't know. I'm not very good at answering questions, I guess. But I think these were really, if you look at Maya Isola's work, who designed this, and the stones, most of the most famous ones are abstractions of nature, pebbles and flowers and things. And some of them were inspired by trips with lovers to Italy, and then you get an apple print or a pear print. So they actually, I haven't written a book on Maya Isola, but they seem to be quite taken from her personal experiences.
I think we have time for just one more question. Okay, I think we have one in the back.
Thank you. There are other great Finnish designers, Aalto and Vuokko and Itala. Were there any direct collaboration or affiliation between the different designers? I mean, they spoke very much in the same natural and minimalist language.
Vuokko designed all the early there was an early designer. The very first collection was sort of along 1950s lines, more form-fitting sheaths with darts, but nothing was selling. Marimekko was way ahead of everything, and they didn't find success, and they didn't found the company called Marimekko until after their first collection of A-line or geometric dresses, and then people suddenly were like, this is how you use it. And Vuokko, who I met in Finland and who's a wonderful woman, she designed a lot of the most famous designs we think of as Marimekko dresses. But I think my impression is it was a battle of wills, and something broke. I think reading between the lines between Army and Vuokko, and so Vuokko started her own company, and doing what she was, very much doing what she was doing for Marimekko. But when Voko talks to you about designing fabrics, she said, they asked me to do a stripe, like a pinstripe, and she did something like, waves or something, and it was a complete break with everything that had come before. Sort of, if you're familiar with Joseph Frank for Svens 10, at the beginning, now we think of that as like classic mid-century design, but at the time, it wasn't a ditzy floral or something safe that was more typical.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for enjoying and coming to, I'm assuming you're enjoying, for coming to our conversation today with Laird about the Art of Printmaking book. It was so nice to have you all. Now we're going to transition over into a few moments for book signing. If anyone has not brought their book with them, they're available for purchase in the front of the store. And make sure you grab your tote bag before you go. Thank you, guys.